Welcome everybody. Now it's time for our today's Joseph Miller lecture series. Those of who doesn't know me, my name is Bahar Bayraktaroğlu. I'm a PhD researcher at Bonn Center of Dependency and Slavery Studies. I'm working on late Ottoman Empire and dependent children. And today it's my honor to introduce our guest lecturer, Nazan Maksudyan. She is a senior researcher and head of the Centre Marc Bloch research team in the UK Research Innovation Funded Research Project, which we just talked about, and it sounded wonderful and very exciting, which is also entitled Ottoman Auralities and Eastern Mediterranean, Sound, Media and Power from late 18th century up until early 20th century. Alongside her research project, she is also board member of many academic journals and associations. These are Association of Middle East Children and Youth Studies, Middle East Children and Youth Studies, Journal of Women's History, and Journal of European Studies. Previously, she was Einstein guest professor in Friedrich Meinecke Institute at Freie Universität Berlin. And even previously, she held many fellowships, again in Berlin. They were in Wissenschaftskolleg and Leibniz Zentrum Moderner Orient. And before moving to Berlin, she worked as a professor of history in Istanbul. And her research mainly focuses on social and cultural history of late Ottoman Empire, late 18th and early 20th centuries, as well as history of modern Turkey, with special interest in children, youth, gender, sexuality, and history of sciences. She has many publications and scholarship. I was only able to bring a little bit today, but one of them will be Orphans and Destitute Children in the Late Ottoman Empire, where she tries to reveal the voices of children, and it's special because it treats children as historical agents. That's why it's significant in scholarship. And then building on her PhD dissertation, if I'm not mistaken, then she penned Ottoman Children and Youth during World War I, again in different forms of children she dealt with, and we learned that, for example, some Ottoman children, orphan children, due to unilateral agreement, apprenticeship agreements, were in Eastern Germany, and their experiences she deals with in the book. And also Armenian children during the genocide. Later, which actually a time period, it's a little bit leaking, but her, I think, MA thesis turned into a book project. This is unfortunately in Turkish, may not be addressing to all of you. However, it's called Türklüğü ölçmek, gauging, measuring. It's basically suggesting that Turkish nationalism is not established based on citizenship only, but more racial theories. And this goes back to early Republic times, starting from 1925. Türk Anthropoloji Mecmuası, Turkish Anthropological Journal, she uses as primary sources. And there is an analogy that I would like to show you, because the idea that this Turkishness that they try to measure is basically here represented in an analogy that is a Cinderella's shoe, and it's not going to fit anybody, and it's very much idealized. So please feel free to have a look at the books. And now we will listen Nazan Maksudyan's research on Johannes Jakob Manissadjian's life and work, who was an Ottoman Armenian scientist, but also he was a genocide survivor. And in light of Manissadjian's work and life, Maksudyan will discuss the potential of biographical methods to study mass violence targeting Ottoman Armenians, considering Manissadjian's agency and subjectivity as a genocide survivor.
Yeah, so thank you for the invitation to the center. Thank you for the kind introduction, Bahar. This was really very nice. You know, you summarized the books and all. Thanks a lot. And thanks all of you for coming. Maybe a few words before I start the presentation itself. You know, why this research? Because you have listened to my earlier research, which I usually focus on children and youth. But now I mean, after like many years after the PhD, you of course develop other areas of study. But this actually was quite at the center of my work. So in a bit, we're going to see that the story is set in an American missionary college in Anatolia College. And this was something that I was researching a lot, even during my PhD thesis, because they had one of the biggest orphanages at the time, you know, built at the end of the 19th century. So this was partially, I mean, American missionary activities has always been very central in my earlier work. And as you have seen, the second book is on the First World War, and I try to situate the Armenian genocide within the history of the First World War in the Ottoman lands. So I have this bigger research area on the genocide studies as well. So this is how it all comes together. And the biographical part, I've been finding myself more and more inclined towards biographical research in the past almost decade, because as part of this Einstein guest professorship at the FU, my project was on the student and professor exchanges between Germany and Turkey in the 30s. And these were mostly PhD students in Germany and Jewish or oppositional exiles in Turkey. And as part of this research, I focused on individual trajectories, and somehow I keep following this individual trajectory kind of methodology in my ongoing work. So I'm also very happy to be part of this like Joseph Miller series, which I also find quite inspiring for his biographical interests. So here you see the younger man is Johannes Jakob Manissadjian. So the Armenian names can also be translated, and we'll see why so. He was born into a German Armenian Protestant family that was part of the American and German missionaries in central Turkey. He went to Europe for further studies and then became a professor at the Anatolia College in Marzipan. His 25 years at the college was quite productive. His activities included the establishment of a meteorological station, collecting flora and fauna, as well as opening a natural history museum until the summer of 1915. Relying on a biographical approach that reconstructs his life and scientific work in Anatolia through material from Ottoman, German, and largely American missionary archives, I traced the roots of disappearance, dispersal, and ruination of indigenous lives, people, and knowledge within the context of the Armenian genocide. I stressed the potential of biographical methods for two reasons. One, to study the processes of structures of mass violence, and two, to foreground the agency and subjectivity of genocide survivors. This microhistorical reconstruction of Manissadjian's life story, constructed next to and in relation to the plight of all Ottoman Armenians, tells the story of both a beginning and an end. First, we will see how, thanks to Manissadjian's work, intelligence, love, and passion for nature, one of the richest natural history museums was opened in the Anatolian countryside. Then, with the genocidal violence, both Manissadjian's life work and the veins of indigenous knowledge production were cut off. His museum was emptied to be used for military purposes, while Anatolia was emptied of its Armenian population. The story of the rise and fall of an inherently Ottoman, multicultural, and indigenous form of knowledge production needs to be understood within the context of recent anthropological work on ruination and imperial debris. Manissadjian was born in Niksar in 1862 to a German mother, Katharina Margarete Barbara Klein, and a Protestant Armenian father, Barsam Manissadjian. His father was one of the early converts of the ABCFM, American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missions. So this was the biggest American missionary group in the Ottoman Empire. And so he was raised within a German Protestant milieu, attending missionary-run primary and secondary schools. There are 3 visiting card portraits of Manissadjian in the manuscript department, Handschriftsabteilung, of the Staatsbibliothek Berlin. The oldest photo is dated December 1879, that's it, and sent to a Dr. Otto Staudinger. He was a well-known German lepidopterist, a butterfly expert, and an insect collector. Johannes knew him because Staudinger came to Amasya to collect insects and butterflies in 1875. Reporting on this tour, Staudinger wrote that Johannes, in parentheses, the curious 13-year-old eldest son of the Manissadjian family, showed great interest in their research and finally accompanied the scientist as a helper and a translator, thanks to his knowledge of Turkish, Armenian, as well as German. Manissadjian was probably then inspired by the scientist and had sent him his portrait a couple of years after to ask for maybe the possibility of studying with him in Berlin. Later in life, the 2 scientists collaborated regularly. I might come to it, but we know that they were sending each other specimens of flora and fauna, which the other one used in their collection. So the details of this attempt to study in Germany are unclear, but what is known is that Manissadjian had his BA degree from the Central Turkey College in Aintab in 1883. This second photo, also preserved in Berlin, was taken in that city. This photo is not dated, but it must be taken around his graduation. He then worked 3 years as a school teacher in Amasya, and in 1885, at the age of 23, he married Arusyak Sera Yunus Dalian, born in Diyarbakir in 1868. So the family of the wife was also part of the Anatolia College. Shortly after his marriage, Manissadjian received a fellowship from the Anatolia College for his higher studies in Europe. He received a total of 70 liras during the academic years of 1886, 87, and 88. He was first enrolled in the University of Heidelberg Natural Sciences faculty in October 1886. After 1 semester, he transferred his credits to Berlin and enrolled himself to the Friedrich Wilhelms Universität. Based on his course transcript, Abgangszeugnis, that he received on November 88, he followed 3 semesters in the Faculty of Philosophy. During his time in Berlin, he attended 21 courses/lectures, including several courses on zoology, botanic, paleontology, meteorology, and ethnology. After his scholarship was cut, after 2 years, he became a lecturer at the Seminar for Oriental Languages, Berliner Seminar für orientalische Sprachen, which was actually recently opened in Berlin in 1887. The director of the institute, Eduard Sachau, mentioned him as a young Ottoman whom he intended to delegate the Turkish lectures in their entirety. After 6 months in this position, Sachau reported that, I quote, "The Turkish class is, if not the best, certainly one of the best in the institution." He also emphasized the exceptional punctuality of the lecturer. Manissadjian worked at the BSOS from April 1888 to August 1890. His main task was to teach Turkish to beginners and advanced students 8 hours a week, supplemented by Turkish exercises for both courses, together 10 hours. In addition, he would offer alternating courses in historical studies, such as on the customs and traditions of the Turks, relations with the German Empire, regional studies. You see on the website, on the PowerPoint. Despite his flourishing career at the seminar, we see that he was successful and loved. He decided to return to Anatolia in 1890. The last photograph of him in Berlin was taken at the studio of Ha Noack, which was actually 2 minutes distance from the university. The photo was dated August 16, 1890, so it should have been taken just before his departure. And this photo was dedicated to a certain Fräulein Grabov. We don't know who. During his time in Berlin, he was not only flirting with young women, but he also wrote a textbook on the modern Ottoman language entitled Mürşidi Lisan Osmani, Lehrbuch der modernen osmanischen Sprache. This was published only after his return in 1893 as the 11th volume of the publication series of the BCOS, edited by Zahau again. The author in the book appears as J.J. Manissadjian, former lecturer at the Seminar for Oriental Languages in Berlin. The preface is dated Merziphone, Asia Minor, November 1892, and also signed as J.J. Manissadjian, teacher at Anatolia College. The title, Teaching, Observing, Collecting at the Anatolia College, I think teacher and observer, lecturer is what defines this man. His teaching career from 1890 to 1915 at the college is well known and documented through different sources. Maybe a little bit of background about the college. So this was one of the most successful colleges of the ABCFM in the Ottoman Empire. In the early years, the college has 100 to 150 students per year, but the enrollment remained quite the same for a long time. However, in the following decade, the enrollment, the student numbers increased incredibly, reaching to almost 200 students in 1896. 2 years later, it was 250 students, and in the educational term of 1914-15, there were 30 lecturers and teaching staff, and the number of students at the college was 425. And these were 200 Greek students, 160 Armenian students, 40 Russians, and 25 Turkish Muslims. Manissadjian was a dedicated teacher, and his research involved close and continuous engagement with the land. So he first established a meteorological station at the Anatolia College and made regular observations starting in 1892. The climatological tables that he prepared, providing information on air temperature, rainfall, air pressure, cloudiness, precipitation, wind, were published as short reports for nearly 20 years in different American, German, Austrian, French journals of meteorology, specifically in Monthly Weather Review, Meteorologische Zeitschrift, and Annales du Central Meteorologie. In these publications, he referred to himself as the observer and his place of work as the Observatory of Anatolia College, Merziphone, latitude 40, I don't know what, 40 degrees, 51 north, etc. So this regularly collected meteorological data actually needs to be considered as valuable information for environmental historians. As part of his great interest in meteorology and climate, Manissadjian was also teaching geography courses in the 1890s. So compiling his lecture notes with other relevant material, he wrote a comprehensive geography book in Armenian. The book had 59 figures and 8 tables and was published in 1902 in Istanbul with the authorization of Ministry of Education and Publications Administration. From the catalog of other schools of the American missionaries, such as St. Paul Institute at Tarsus, we can deduce that the book was used as a course book for geography classes in other American colleges as well. Manissadjian's most well-known special merit was the expansion of college natural history collection. This much cherished ideal, as he wrote years later, was to have a special museum building, and this was completed only in 1910-11. During the 2 decades prior to the opening of the museum, Manissadjian and his students had been exploring Central Anatolia and collecting specimens of minerals, flora, and fauna. After 1911, in his time as the director of the museum, Manissadjian made further excursions in the country and to collect natural objects. He traveled all around Anatolia, the Black Sea region, Central, South, Eastern Anatolia, and he relied on pedagogical possibilities of fieldwork. As you have seen in both photos, he was taking students to these collection activities, and this was part of the course. Thanks to this collective effort, the museum acquired a serious natural science collection within a short period of time. Manissadjian reported the existence of more than 7,000 zoological, paleontological, and mineralogical specimens. More specifically, 40 mammals and other large taxidermy, 70 birds, 50 mollusks, 2,500 different kinds of insects, 1,200 plants, 100 specimens of wood, more than 1,000 fossils, and 900 minerals and rocks. The museum was open to the public 2 days a week and saw around 800 visitors, mainly school children, each month. So this museum would also foster a global scientific discourse, cultivating partnerships in specimen exchanges with scientists and curators in Austria, Germany, and the UK. Thanks to this wide network of scientific contacts, many specimens that were collected by Manissadjian now end up in museums in Bern, Vienna, Edinburgh, and Berlin. The rupture. So the deportation of the faculty of Anatolia College and family members started in the summer of 1915 and spared only a few. On June 28, 1915, the gendarmes arrested Manissadjian. Bribe was paid for his release. A Maximilian Zimmer, a German owner of a farm in the area, obtained a permission from the governorate for Manissadjian and his wife's family to stay in this German farm. Since Manissadjian's mother was also German, they were trying to use this German card. It was accepted, and they went to this farm in July. But on July 17, already 1 week after his departure, state officers went to the Manissadjian house and listed his property. 2 days later, missionaries learned that the governor was going to move into his house, and one of the missionaries, Berta Morley, whose diaries of the genocide in Marzipan is famous, wrote that Anatolia College staff were all aware that the garden of Manissadjian was greatly envied by Turkish officials. So the entire Anatolia College staff and students and families were deported on August the 10th. Very few of them survived. In order to save their lives and their families, Manissadjian and Dalian families in this German farm converted to Islam during their stay at the Zimmer farm. Again, this Berta Morley noted in her diaries on August 1927 that all the Armenians in the farm were deported except for Manissadjian and Dalian, who were exempted from the deportations. On September 3, she briefly wrote that they turned, probably unable to use the more spiritually and morally heavily concept of conversion. I quote, "We were all saddened by a report that seemed straight that Professor Manissadjian and Professor Dalian had become Muslim. According to the story, officers came and told them they must go out on Sevkiyat at once or turn. Such pressure was put on them that they turned." Manissadjian also had to witness the massacre of Armenians in the area who were murdered in a close-by killing field. This was the last massacre in the area committed after the deportations. The governor of Sivas, Muammer Bey, came in the fall of 1915 and ordered this time the massacre of converted Armenians. Zimmer and Manissadjian were again spared with bribes and their German connections, but they saw the remains and all the signs of terrible struggles for life. At the end of the war, Manissadjian first went to Istanbul and worked for a short period of time at the American College for Girls in Arnavutköy, while the family was getting ready to migrate to the United States. According to the documents in the American Immigration Project, Manissadjian's 21-year-old Catherine and his 15-year-old son Edward departed from the port of Patras, Greece on October 1919 and arrived in New York in November the 5th. The young siblings were met by a Mr. Dalian, who declared himself as their uncle. Their place of residence is also noted, Butler Department Store, New Jersey, USA. Manissadjian and his wife first went to London and then traveled to New York City on October 25 in 1920, so 1 year later. Again, based on the records of the American Philatelist Society and other records in this Armenian immigration project, the family remained in Brooklyn at least until 1923. In late 1920s, I'm not sure exactly when, Manissadjian and his wife moved to Detroit, Michigan. But before his exile, he made one last thing in Merzifonk, cataloging the natural history collection of the Museum of Anatolia in 1917. So when mass violence was targeting the Armenians, when this mass violence came to a standstill in the fall of 1917, Manissadjian returned to then militarized zone of Merzifonk. After ensuring the survival of himself and his family, he was now preoccupied with the continued existence of his natural history collection, or at least a record of its former existence. He had spent almost a year at the college preparing the catalog at a crime scene where his life was spared. In his terms, he, as the curator, curated a catalog of the collection of the Anatolia College Museum, an exhaustive document of all the specimens he collected. The catalog alphabetically ordered and listed all the showcases, tables, stands, and drawers. In 156 handwritten pages, each object in the showcase was recorded within his system, indexed by number, English and scientific name, area of origin, trade and purchase value, or taxidermy cost. Many items contained remarks on specific characteristics and the name of the collector, usually a student or a faculty member of the college. In the introduction of the catalog, written and signed in December 1917 by the curator, Professor J.J. Manissadjian, he wrote, "The universal war," the war is missing here, "put a stop to all scientific work, except the continuation of arranging, labeling, and cataloging the specimens, which after an interruption of 2 years was again undertaken in the fall of 1917 by the former curator. Apparently, he did not say a word about the mass murder of Armenians, but put the blame on the Great War, which affected scientific knowledge production on a global scale. His public voice, in that sense, attempted to make his act seem ordinary. However, in the light of his experiences during the genocidal years and his later decision to migrate to the US, we clearly see that this was his last duty to his own scientific legacy. He had a clear understanding that his museum collection could not survive in one piece, but would rather be fragmented, plundered, and dispersed. While the genocide meant the disintegration of the collection as a whole, Manissadjian's detailed recording of each object in 1917 can be recognized as his resistance to the impending post-catastrophe anonymity of the collection. As Mariana Hovhannisyan argues, Manissadjian's curatorial act was actually an archival act. The catalogue was his pre-mortem written estate, tereke, if we think in terms of the Ottoman documentation universe. Tereke literally means everything that remains from a deceased person. Even though Manissadjian was still alive, he called himself the former curator. So he was aware that his connection to the collection lied already in the past. He also knew that he would be forced to leave all the collected items of the museum to their fate, along with his library, observatory, and his other scholarly estate. So his scientific work was already a remnant. The catalogue was his life's work, tombstone. Manissadjian's life story after the genocide questions how science and knowledge could matter after mass violence. But his final act of archiving valuable and endangered knowledge was his way of coping with the fact that he has outlived the downfall, if we use Theodor Adorno's terms. I quote, "The concept of a cultural resurrection after Auschwitz is illusory and absurd, and every work created since then has to pay the bitter price for this. But because the world has outlived its downfall, it nevertheless needs art to write its unconscious history. So his farewell to his beloved museum and his native land can also be read in these final words of the catalogue. Some directions. Every spring, the cases containing animal and vegetable specimens should be examined and cleaned and naphthalene be renewed. Broken or injured specimens should be repaired. Whenever occasion offers itself, old and worn or bad species should be replaced by new, good ones. The opening of cases or boxes by unauthorized person should be avoided." In contrast to his studies in Germany and professorship in Anatolia College, it becomes very difficult to follow Manissadjian's biography during the genocide and after his migration to the United States. The genocidal moment disrupts his life and only allows a fragmentary life story in the aftermath of mass violence. Here I want to refer to Yael Navarro's negative methodology and the relevance of gaps, voids, and hollows. Manissadjian seems to have stopped his scientific work and severed his ties with his international network. Mass violence and the trauma of it is probably there, but I want to stress the disconnection from his field. Manissadjian's entire scientific research in geography, climate, natural history were all in dialogue with Anatolia and his indigenous field. His forced uprooting from this land severed his ties not only to his home, but also to his work. But I find another archival act, which I called Archival Act 2. After migrating to the US in 1920, Manissadjian appears again as now this time J.J. Manis in 1925. He wrote a small book entitled Proverbs of Turkey, a compilation of about 300 Turkish proverbs in their English translations. This was another act of collecting, of orally transmitted collective wisdom. Manissadjian had been a collector of specimens of natural history all his life, from the time of his teenage years, working with Otto Staudinger, till his late age. So in his diasporic existence, he could no longer collect material items from Anatolian fauna and flora. Nevertheless, he decided to focus on another form of indigenous literacy, and assemble cultural and folkloric artifacts, probably from his memory. So the booklet, I argue, was a contemplative trip to his homeland from the diaspora. Interestingly, or maybe unfortunately, the booklet has no thematic chapters, does not provide an alphabetical order, and has no epilogue or prologue to hint about the intentions of the author. The original Turkish version of the proverbs and their meanings are also not provided. It's just a list of proverbs in English. But this collection in this form, in its scattered way and in its lacking interpretation, is this time reminiscent of Benjamin's philosophy of, again, debris, as Manissadjian was just collecting fragments and shied away from a fuller account. But this was still an archival act, similar to his catalogue. The assemblage of 300 idioms would still provide an ethnographic portrait of Anatolia and a register of deeper structures, mentalities, and common practices. For instance, there's a remarkable animal population, plant presence, weather events, and landscape descriptions in the proverbs that are listed in this book. In their totality, they highlight the centrality of the land in rural people's life and their close connection with their natural surroundings. Numerous proverbs, on the other hand, underline a heavy feeling of helplessness and constant hardship as common people's ordinary way of life. Was he maybe trying to point at the isolation, despair, abandonment felt by peasant communities in the 19th century with idioms like, if he were rain, he would not fall on your field, or let him die who remains undermost. I mean, Turkish speakers might know the translation. One might also notice some latent hints to the mass violence. The book astonishingly opens with the proverbs dealing with the enemy, neighbors, and friendship. The word enemy appears 7 times throughout the book, and in total in 6 different proverbs. The very first proverb of the book, an old friend does not become an enemy. So again, was he trying to say how Armenians were demonized overnight? And proverbs on truth, honesty, and memory also suggests that he was trying to find interesting connotations in a post-genocide context if trying to understand what is truth, what is honesty, how can we speak about it. Apart from the booklet, Manissadjian makes another last appearance in the archives in 1928 because he made a short trip to Germany and Austria. He prepared a handwritten report, a 5-page report, entitled A Trip to German Lands in January 1929. And he submitted this to the Detroit Public Library. Manissadjian signed the Proverbs of Turkey, as well as this report, under his new, shortened, and hidden name, J.J. Manis, which he took in 1926 when he was naturalized as a US citizen. Given the fact that Johannes Jakob Manissadjian was an established scholar who made a name for himself in the past 2.5 decades, writing several books, numerous articles, and collaborating with an international group of scientists, I find this name change quite surprising. While his rather well-known name was, and still is, registered in the catalogs of numerous natural history collections, he picked up an untraceable name. The deletion of suffixes made his Anatolian origins, like Manisa, as well as his Armenian ancestry with the Yan, disappear. This life story of Johannes Jakob Manissadjian reflects both the flourishing of indigenous knowledge production, thanks to collecting, preserving, and archiving acts of the scientists. We also witness its tragic demise as annihilating practices targeting homeland, livelihood, intellectual, and cultural works. The dispersion of his natural history collection, the eradication of Armenian population in Anatolia, And Manissadjian's own scientific retreat exemplify the ruination and loss experienced by Ottoman Armenians during the genocide. This biographical approach to Manissadjian's life work also foregrounds his subjectivity as a genocide survivor, who spontaneously became a curator, creating a new form of archive. The catalogue was his brave act of archiving a trove of knowledge that was at risk of becoming debris. His humble resistance to oblivion also made him an amateur folklorist, providing another form of documentation. Proverbs was an attempt to reanimate the fragments of his homeland through a linguistic and contemplative trip to Anatolia. But it also intimately engaged with the impossibility and irretrievability of the past in a genocidal context. Thank you.